Hi, everyone. I can see we've got a few people popping in here from the lobby. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll make a start very soon. Hopefully most people are just kind of starting to come into the room. We'll just give everyone a couple more moments to join us. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we do start. This video webinar will be recorded and available on the FFF YouTube channel shortly. It'll also be sent to you as a registration of the webinar. There'll be some space for some Q&A at the end, and you can also feel free to type some questions into the chat as we go, which the wonderful Steph and myself will answer as we go or at the end. We have an hour booked in all your calendars, but we don't think we'll probably need all of that unless we have some really robust discussions at the Q&A at the end. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of time back in your diary. We'll jump straight into it. Before we do start today, I'd like to acknowledge the lands from which I'm joining you from today. I am joining you from the lands of the Wamba Peripa people in beautiful Deniliquin in New South Wales. So on the screen there, you'll see a beautiful image of the Edward River, also known locally as the Collette River. This is an Anna branch of the Murray River. So we're connected in Deniliquin here to many other communities and countries across the Murray region through this waterway. It's a truly wonderful place to live and work, and I'd like to acknowledge the continued custodianship of this land that allows me to be able to live and work in this place and have that privilege and enjoy the beautiful part of Australia here. I acknowledge that this land always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and I'd like to pay my respect to all elders past, present and those emerging. And extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. As always, feel free to pop in the chat where you're joining us from today in the country where you are living or working. It's such a beautiful opportunity to see the breadth of the geography and where we're all coming from. Thanks for joining us all today for this Backing the Future grant presentation. Hopefully the purpose of this is to get a bit more of an understanding of the opportunity that this grant provides and hopefully some useful information for you about the program and the opportunities in it. So I'm Youth Features Manager here at FFF, so Lauren Ryan. Joining me on the screen is also Steph. She is the coordinator of the Back in the Future grant program. And so you quite often will be speaking to her if you have any inquiries about the program, and she is a wealth of knowledge about the program. So between the two of us, hopefully we should be able to answer any questions that you have today. Backing the Future at its core is a grant program that provides individuals with funding to test new ideas and innovative ideas that support rural, remote and regional young people in New South Wales and Queensland. This particular grant round, of course, being a New South Wales grant round, the funding is restricted to supporting young people in rural, remote and regional New South Wales. But we, are hoping that this grant program will be able to bring forward some projects that are testing and trialling new ideas. Backing the Future is a little bit innovative in that it is funding that supports individual-led projects. So unlike everything else at FFF, we traditionally fund organisations and not-for-profit organisations. Backing the Future is a little bit outside of that box. So it's a program that we run in partnership with Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation, and it's specifically to fund individual-led projects and things that wouldn't otherwise be eligible for philanthropic support. Projects need to trial and deliver new ideas or new concepts that hadn't otherwise been tested in communities. And projects need to support young people who are aged in that sort of 12 to 30-year-old bracket. You can see here with POP just kind of the ultimate impact. I think it's really helpful when you're thinking about if this grant program is for me to consider what the objectives of the grant ultimately are. And I think if you kind of have a look at the ultimate impact that we're hoping to achieve through Backing the Future is that young people in rural, remote and regional New South Wales and Queensland have access to experiences that fundamentally shape who they become and what they believe is possible within their community, delivered by change makers who are, equipped and resourced through the funding to do their best work. If you feel like that is a statement that kind of resonates with the work that you're doing or a project that you have in mind, it's probably a good indication that this is an opportunity for you. I mentioned just quickly there that this is a grant program delivered in partnership by FFF and VFFF. There's a lot of acronyms there, and I tend to get a bit mixed up with those, but I'm glad that I got that one right. I think it's worth us just kind of touching on this because it can sometimes be a little bit confusing as a grant seeker about who you're talking to or who you're applying for. So just to kind of make that very, very clear, this is a program that is owned and funded by the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation. So they're based in Sydney. They've been delivering Backing the Future for 9 grant rounds now. We're here to support them to make sure that the funding reaches into really like the areas that need it most across rural, remote New South Wales and Queensland. We obviously, that's our bread and butter at FFF, is making sure that funding reaches grassroots organisations in those communities. So we're supporting VFFF to make sure that that funding funds through to those really small communities. And we're also there to support the grantees as they embark on that kind of change maker journey. The wonderful thing about the Backing the Future grants is that it's often funding projects that are really in their early infant stages, which means that sometimes they change a little bit as they get rolled out, or they potentially need a little bit more support to fully flesh them out. And so we're there as a bit of a resource to help the change makers on that journey as well. In terms of what that relationship looks like, as you apply for funding, you do that through the Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation grant portal, but you'll also be receiving communications from us. If you are successful, you'll then have a funding relationship with the VFFF organisation, but predominantly we're sort of your first point of call. So if you have any inquiries or you need to know any more information or anything like that, please, feel free to reach out to us in the first instance. So Backing the Future, I've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's really helpful to position what makes Backing the Future different. It's quite unlike a lot of the other grant programs, and what's really exciting about this one is VFFF's ability to fund individuals. So through VFFF's long experience funding organisations and projects that support young people, what they were consistently hearing was one of the hardest parts of the journey, or one of the most difficult times for organisations, was getting that initial funding. So they had a really great idea but didn't have funding to test it, couldn't get funding to test it because the idea hadn't been proven. And so that kind of chicken and egg situation was really difficult for a lot of emerging change makers or for organisations that were trying to establish themselves. And so Backing the Future as a grant concept was established to really fit that specific situation. So it's funding that's available to individuals that wouldn't otherwise be eligible for philanthropic support. So, most of your philanthropic organisations can only fund charities or established organisations. This grant opportunity really removes that opportunity. It's also a safe space to test ideas. So we know that there's like all these incredible impactful programs that, exist to support young people. But they all started with that really great idea. And so, many of them were really hamstrung by that need to form a not-for-profit structure, then prove that the idea works. But this grant funding is really hoping to just invest in those ideas when they are just an idea stage, take a bit of a chance on ideas that, maybe have potential, and hopefully fund those great ideas to start to get those projects off the ground. What's exciting about this too is that there's a lot of flexibility around what the funds can be spent on. We know that traditionally within granting and philanthropy, there can be a real tendency to only, fund the tangible things or the projects and outputs that that can be put on a report, but this funding can really be used to pay for, you know, the work that it takes to get there. So whatever you need to get to that end goal. So things like wages and research and setting up of organizations, those types of things. Of course, we can also provide funding for those project costs as well. Backing the Future also supports projects with a real range of different end goals. So whether your project's a one-off or if it's a plan to use the Backing the Future opportunity to proof the concept before bringing others on board, or if your grand plan is to scale your project all over the state, like all those different kind of outcomes can be supported by Backing the Future. One of the things that we're doing here at FRRR, we're obviously up to cohort, I think this is cohort 9. So there's what's emerged is this group of change makers all across the state, all across New South Wales, who are all working towards supporting young people in their own communities. So in this alumni that we're connecting and supporting so that they can help one another. And that's something really wonderful about the program too, is that there's a group of other people who are doing similar work that can all kind of lean on each other as this like really initial stages that they're starting. Something that we wanted to mention on today's presentation, if you have seen Backing the Future before, if you've been familiar with the grant or applied before or had a look before, you will have noticed that previously Backing the Future had focus areas. So there were 4 focus areas that grants had to align with to be eligible. These are no longer the case. So projects simply need to be delivered by an individual and supporting young people in rural New South Wales and supporting young people aged 12 to 30 to be eligible. So we've just mentioned them there just in case you have previously seen them and you're wondering, you know, where they went or anything like that. They were previously there, but now, yeah, there's no need to identify your project with one of those focus areas. And what we found was a lot of projects actually touched on multiple different focus areas anyway. So we've removed those, and hopefully that streamlines things a little bit more and makes it a bit easier for applications. On to the next slide here. I'm going to pass along to Steph here, who's going to talk about in practicality what that might look like in funding projects.
Thank you, Lauren, and welcome everyone. So Lauren's kind of gone through the nuts and bolts of what the Backing the Future grant really is, and like its essence about having that transformative impact on young people and also the change maker themselves. VFFF are really wanting to back change makers in those kind of early stages of them making an impact, starting to make an impact in community and for other young people. So I wanted to just pop a quick slide here just to speak about, you know, scale and numbers. And when you're putting together an application, you know, there's often a tendency to feel like you need to have this huge reach for a pilot project and for it need to just like, you know, run off like flawlessly and all this kind of stuff. And so I really just want to like ground the discussion with saying that the grant is quite agnostic to scale. So VFFF recognise that your project may benefit, you know, 8 young people in a really deep way over the 12 months of the grant, or 80 young people from a community, or 800 people in a really light touch way. But they're all kind of considered equally valuable if they're able to have that sort of transformative impact on young people. We're looking for ways for young people to experience something that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to. So just in terms of 3 examples that kind of demonstrate this of what Backing the Future has funded in the past, we have had a 7-day camp for 20 young farmers between the ages of 18 to 25. So a very specific kind of cohort going through similar challenges and struggles within the youth category of 12 to 30. And they're exploring regenerative agriculture methods in the Queensland rangelands. So kind of, you know, this isn't a touch point that happens over 12 months. There's obviously a lot of planning that goes into it before and after, but the actual touch point with young people is a 7-day camp, you know, an immersive experience. We've also had a project that was 6 months of fortnightly video game nights for young people. So this is more in that younger cohort from like around 12 to 18. And so consistently they were getting anywhere between 8 to 60 young people at community halls per event all around the Bega Valley. We've also had a young person who was doing workshops, like traveling around to many different regional rural locations. And so they engaged 519 high school students across 5 different workshops in different areas, doing workshops about eco-anxiety and actions on how to take care of the environment in these areas and take action. And so this was also in rural and regional New South Wales. So you can see there's, it might be a workshop with 8 young people or mentoring opportunity, and there might be hundreds of young people affected through a high school program. So that's the kind of breadth and depth and variety that is accepted and is eligible with Backing the Future. So I'll also just kind of go into some other projects that have been funded with a more regional approach and then a more place-based approach across the next couple of slides. So kind of going back into this idea of, a young change maker who is doing more of a touring model. So we had Jamison do an intensive tour across regional remote Queensland, bridging the gap in STEM knowledge between rural and metro young people. So what he was doing was bringing drones and robots and helping young people build them to kind of have a really immersive, fun experience of STEM that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to through their school resourcing, but it was still aligned to the curriculum. We have Ria, who's doing a series of conferences in regional Queensland that are aimed at empowering and connecting young people living with disabilities, chronic illnesses, or who identify as neurodivergent. So this is really an opportunity for those young people to connect in a social way and also expand their own skill sets and networks. We had Rosina doing a policy submission as part of her grant. So this was a huge research project that aimed to get the kind of qualitative experiences of young people and young women in rural Queensland in particular, and improve the quality of life for those young people. So it tracked their experiences in school, in the medical system, in their careers, to kind of paint a picture of what it's like growing up in rural Queensland as a young woman. And then in terms of place-based approaches, these are some grants that were really grounded in particular communities and focused all of that like energy and resourcing on that particular area. So we have Nick, who was up in Palm Island, delivering and creating mattresses, beds, washing machines designed by community through recycled plastic waste. So these were aimed to be products that the communities would be able to repair and repurpose themselves, wash, canvas, bedding. So it was all designed for that specific community and making sure that it was able to be used, those products were able to be used continuously by them. We also had Prue up in Longreach host a one-day forum for young people in remote areas to look at their different career opportunities in regional primary production and agriculture. So it was called the Future Grass Growers Forum. And then we had Shanae up in Cowan in far north Queensland do cultural education of bush medicines. So taking an ethnobotanist out with elders, Indigenous rangers, scientists and young people for botanical field work. So this was research for a skincare social enterprise that's in the works, but it was those very early stages of going, okay, what's actually involved? What would actually be involved in bringing about this social enterprise? What's the botanical knowledge we need? What's the cultural knowledge we need to continue a program like this? So again, very early stage research and development of that social enterprise idea. All right, so Lauren mentioned before that we don't have those very strict 4 focus areas anymore, but one of the priorities of Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation is still to fund Christian faith and values projects across their granting, whether it's Backing the Future or their board level grants. So exploring Christian faith and values applications are still eligible, and we do still welcome them in. One example of a grantee who's just acquitted was Lewis. So this is a photo from his project. And he was able to mentor 12 young people to share their faith through creative works. So kind of the journey of, their particular faith and leadership, culminating in a live showcase and inspiring peer-to-peer community engagement. So Lewis was connecting and supporting young people who were textile artists, who were dancers, who were musicians, all to create some sort of artistic work and be mentored for multiple months along that journey and showcase it to their peers. So that's just one example of what's possible with the Christian faith and values focus area. All right, so in terms of the actual process that anyone who's on the line today will be going through in order to apply for Backing the Future, what's open now is expressions of interest, or EOIs. So this is a very short form accessible on the Backing the Future VFFF page. And so this just has a little bit, it's a space for you to just do very brief like an overview of your project, kind of like what you think it will look like, what's the title, how is your work youth-led and youth-focused, and then your eligibility in terms of, are you an individual applying, are you an organisation applying, how long has your idea been in development. So this is a chance for VFFF to just get an idea of if your project is really eligible, or if we could potentially direct you to other funding that may be more applicable that's not Backing the Future. And then for all eligible applications, so within 3 days, a VFFF will get back to you after you've submitted an EOI to say, yes, this is eligible, and here's an invitation to submit a full application, or no, your project might not be eligible, and here's an alternative that you might want to look at. So full applications have a lot more information that's needed in them. So eligible candidates can submit a full project plan, a budget, a video pitch, and any kind of letters of support. And so throughout this process, we are here to kind of help if you're like struggling with what to put on your budget, because we know that, $50,000 to an individual rather than, going to a charity account, it's a pretty significant investment in your growth and the young people that'll be affected by your project. So there's often some questions about, okay, what might it look like? What might my resourcing look like over 12 months with a $50,000 grant? So we're very happy to kind of go through any of those questions with you. And then something else I wanted to draw your attention to is the video element of the application. So this is compulsory. Everyone needs a video. And so this can be up to 3 minutes. And it's just asking you to share a little bit about yourself. What's your why for what you do? A little bit about your project. And the key thing here is just that authenticity of kind of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. The first people that will be looking at this video will actually be the youth advisory group. So when you're writing your EOI, when you're writing your application, just have in mind that, the main people who would be going through this is a group of 7 awesome young people. It's not kind of stuffy people making decisions in a boardroom. It is a group of young people who all are deeply connected to rural, regional and remote areas. And so they kind of have that in mind when they're looking at your application and looking at how you're wanting to impact young people. So your video pitch is really to them. It's not to the foundation itself. It's to other young people to say, hey, here's my idea. Here's why I think it's awesome. Maybe here's some traction or momentum that we already have going on. But, this video can be like, we've had people filming in their cars with their kids crying in the background. We've had people filming in their gardens with chickens running around and roosters crowing. Like, really, it's about your authentic self. So don't feel the need to do this big production value, big budget situation. Although if you are like a videographer and you love that sort of thing, if that's your love language, then pop that in too. So what happens after you submit your full application, which is due the 24th of August, which the video pitch is within that. There's a link there. Is that all applications will be shortlisted by the Youth Advisory Group. So I'll speak about them a little bit more on the next slide. And then they will shortlist to around 14 candidates. Those candidates will then be interviewed by a grants committee from VFFF. So these are younger members of the Fairfax family that are all involved actively in social impact initiatives themselves. And so they'll just be asking a little bit more about your plans, your budget, anything that the Youth Advisory Group have brought up that they want to be asked of you as well. The grants committee select up to 10 grantees. All applicants are notified whether you are successful or unsuccessful. And then we go forward with a due diligence and background check process. So I'll also talk a little bit more about that process later on. So just a note on the wonderful Youth Advisory Group. So again, these are amazing young people connected to rural and regional areas. They get together twice a year to shortlist all of the applications and really consider them very deeply. So you know that if you are applying, time will be spent, you know, on your application. It's not just a tick box exercise. They really deeply consider, you know, everything that you've put in your application. What they're really wanting to see the most is work that is youth-led, co-designed, or actively incorporates and elevates the voices of young people. They're looking for innovative approaches to youth engagement, and that young people, again, as Lauren and I have mentioned, just are able to have access to experiences that are transformative for them in their lives. We're also looking for projects that support rural and regional communities to drive change, and that change is often led or co-led by young people. And they're looking at tangible opportunities for young people to grow personally and professionally during those 12 months. Something that is unique, another element that is unique about this grant is that we do have a section in the application for what would be like letters of support. But the thing that the Youth Advisory Group value most with those letters of support is actually buy-in from young people themselves. So, you know, while we're happy to accept letters of support from, you know, schools or community groups or local stakeholders, what they value the most is actual testimonials from young people themselves. So these can be screenshots shared with permission of, you know, from socials, comments, emails, DMs, direct messages on TikTok saying, hey, I'm a young person and I want this, or I would love this in my area. Or it might be a young person who wants to actually be a co-lead of your project and them saying, I'm committed to this project for 12 months if it was to get off the ground. So really that buy-in and knowing that this will resonate with young people is the kind of proof in the pudding that the Youth Advisory Group is looking for. All right, so some previous grantees have kind of shared their learnings. This is a program where we have a few touch points with grantees throughout the process. And because it can be rough and ready, they're pilot projects. These are things that grantees kind of wish they knew when they were designing, you know, for the end from the beginning. So one element is if projects involve working in schools, you know, how connected are you with those schools? Have you secured their support? Are you in, as many grantees kind of say to us? And then if there's any kind of elements of stakeholder engagement, community engagement, is there evidence of buy-in, you know, or do you just think this program would be so great in theory, but haven't really socialized it with people? So just making sure that there's kind of clear buy-in that's able to be proven at that application stage if possible. Have a think about what success looks like for you at the end of the funding period. It may be securing more funding from other organisations to deliver this again. It may be a project that's one-off that fulfills and meets a specific need, you know, in community or for young people right now. And you might go, okay, this doesn't necessarily need to be funded by other philanthropic support in future, but maybe it's able to be shared amongst community or taken on by an NGO or taken on by a social enterprise. It might not be you spearheading it in the future. So just have a think about all of the different options that might be possible for your project after the 12 months. Consider what additional funding may be required in this process as well, and what entities or structures may be needed to carry the project forward. So we have a lot of grantees that maybe are thinking about starting a charity or a social enterprise or a social business during this time. And so this pilot project for successful grantees can be the thing that really helps them flesh out what they want that to look like. It also might be something that, you know, you pivot again after the 12 months and you go, okay, I tested that thing and here's my plan in place if that thing didn't work or if I decide to go in a completely different direction. So this is just really to reduce that overwhelm, you know, that comes with getting such a significant amount of money for a change maker in their early stages. So going back to different elements of the journey for successful grantees. So we'll just dive a bit deeper into this process. The first step after being shortlisted and chosen for the up to 10 grantees that are able to be chosen is a due diligence process. So prior to receiving funds, applicants will need to complete a background check because this is a unique grant that gives to individuals rather than charities. So we have to have those frameworks in there for giving in this circumstance. So the background check involves a bankruptcy check, police check, and also working with children check. So in New South Wales, it's a working with children. In Queensland, it's a blue card. So this is not a pass-fail. It's more of the start of a conversation if things do come up on those checks. So we as FFFF support applicants throughout this process, including in instances where documentation may not be available, may be missing, or if recipients have any concerns about the outcome of the background check process. After this has happened, there is a grant agreement that's issued by VFFF. Funds will be available after signing this. So this can happen very quickly after the due diligence process, or for some people, the due diligence process takes a little bit longer. So we have that funds are available from November to January, but projects will need to kind of start in January next year and take you to January 2028. So that 12-month delivery period. Once people are paid, we do a beautiful meet the cohort experience. So that is where all of the grantees gather online and just kind of introduce each other, start that peer learning, start that peer network. We do a midpoint check-in, which is a one-on-one call with grantees and someone from the FFFR team, just to see how you're going, just to see, okay, what are your wins so far? What are your challenges? You know, are there any roadblocks that we can assist with, or any people that we can connect you with that will help you with solving any problems or challenges? This is also where we can consider any variations that need to happen to your project, and we can write that down and record that. And we also look at your budget at that stage and go, okay, you know, what was accounted for, what wasn't accounted for, and how may we be able to adjust that? And then at the end, we do a reflection roundtable. So again, another opportunity for all of the grantees to gather together and just kind of discuss their learnings, what they've learned about themselves, what they've learned about rural and regional young people, and any kind of plans that they have moving forward. Throughout that process, there'll also be capacity development opportunities. So we do different workshops on things like diversifying funding, impact coaching, creating a theory of change, just kind of whatever needs are arising at that time for grantees in that cohort. All right, I will pass on to Lauren next for eligibility. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Steph. So I'm going to go through some of the really boring but important kind of eligibility stuff. So just really quickly wanted to touch on the eligible and ineligible portion of it. So we talk about individuals, I also wanted to mention that we have also funded small groups of individuals. So there's been situations where it's been, 2 or 3 people kind of doing it together as an informal project. We can certainly fund that as well. We just need a lead applicant, so who the granting relationship would be between Vincent Fairfax Family Foundation and the group. Those individuals do have to be aged 18 plus. That's the only kind of piece on that. So we love projects from young people, and we certainly have projects where under 18-year-olds have been involved and heavily driving things, but we obviously can't have them as the grantee and that legal relationship. So we do need an individual who is 18 plus to be able to actually sign that grant contract. You don't need to be a young person to deliver it yourself. We love young at heart, and we certainly have projects that have been delivered by all kinds of people within the community. Do you have to be an Australian citizen or permanent resident? Projects, so the projects that are being delivered need to be delivered in rural New South Wales. And so as a geography and to give you a bit of an indication about what that looks like, that is using the modified Monash model, geographic areas 2 to 7. I'll speak to that again in a moment to give you more context, but just letting you know that the projects need to be delivered in those areas. Things that can be funded, so any kinds of project costs. So that's wages for yourself or others to work on the project. That could be if you're paying young people stipends, honorariums, wages, those types of things, we can fund them. We can fund project costs such as equipment, event stuff. We can fund costs related to sort of strengthening your foundation. So if you need some accounting support, or if you need some business support to set up a structure that will be fit for purpose into the future, they're the kinds of things we can fund. And then any kind of like planning, research development, or exploring any further partnerships. There are some things that are straight out ineligible. If you have any questions about these, I encourage you to get in touch with us directly, because a lot of these we can kind of speak to individually. Projects from registered charities or organisations. There is a bit of a nuance to this. So we can't accept an application that has come from an entity that will be sort of delivering that. But we also recognise that someone, sometimes ideas develop within the context of, employment or passion projects. And so sometimes there is a little bit of overlap with that. So if there's someone within an organisation that has a great idea, wants to drive it as themselves, take ownership of it, and, maybe bring in some learnings or do a little bit of partnering with an organisation that they know of or are currently working with, that's okay. We just couldn't fund the entity themselves. So as an example, I work for FRRR. I live in my community. I see a great opportunity to deliver a project for young people. I apply as Lauren Ryan. I would be funded. But I also might bring along my friend Steph, who works at FRRR, to present to the young people. So that would be fine. We can bring in learnings and, resources and leverage the things that are happening, but it would be me that's delivering it. FRRR is completely ancillary to that. Again, if your project is in a metro or major city locations, it is ineligible. So we'll show you that in a moment. Projects that have been in active development for more than 3 years. So when we say active development, we're talking about, that there's things been happening, there's projects being delivered, or there's funding that you've been getting in. We recognise sometimes that people might have already started taking some of those steps to get your idea off the ground, but you still haven't quite got to that point of actually being able to fully deliver it. And this funding could be that first step. So as long as your project has been in active development for less than that 3 years, we do consider that a new idea. Again, if you're unsure about it, feel free to reach out to us. And then we can have a conversation about that. And then, of course, there's some things that are just straight out ineligible exclusions that we can't fund there that we've listed. Some frequently asked questions that we often get that I just wanted to touch on. Can only young people apply? Not at all. So anyone aged 18 plus, as I just said before, you can be whatever age you want, as long as the project itself benefits young people aged between 12 and 30. In the comments there, Monica also had a question around, does a project need to be aimed directly at young people, or can it support or train an organisation to support young people? It's a bit of a nuanced question, that one there, but I think if you think about it in terms of outcomes, as long as the project outcomes are that young people aged 12 to 30 will be better off as a result of this project, and the mechanism might be supporting the structures around them or the older people or organisations around them, that could be eligible. So I think that's a good guidance for that one there. In terms of community eligibility, how do I know if my community is eligible? So this is that modified Monash model or model that I was referring to. You'll be able to see on this picture here, so that kind of neon blue, that is the border of MM1, so metropolitan areas. So you can see it's Sydney and quite a few of the surrounds. So that area there is ineligible. Anything outside of that is fine. And we're talking specifically about project delivery. So you could live in one of those areas, but to be delivering a project outside of it, that's fine. We also recognise that sometimes these borders aren't quite, there's a fair bit of grey area between these borders. And so if you have a project that's in this MM1 area and you really think it supports regional young people, please do feel free to reach out to have a bit of a discussion with us. Sometimes we do recognise that there are nuances around this model that is not quite perfect, but it is a really good indication about sort of what we're trying to achieve. On the next one here, you can see from this whole of Australia map, the modified Monash model, it ranges from MM1 to MM7. So what we're really hoping to do is to support, those kind of communities that wouldn't necessarily get funding. So if your project's being delivered anywhere in those MM2 onto MM7, we're able to support it. The next one that we get a lot is, if I don't live where I'm delivering my project. As I said, totally okay. We've definitely had projects that have been delivered by someone who has come into a community or who's doing some kind of tour. Steph spoke earlier about some of those projects. My advice to you on that one there is you really need to demonstrate how you've connected, consulted with, or got buy-in from the community that you're proposing to work in. So the grants committee and the youth advisory group, something that they're very, very conscious of is projects that are doing to community, not of community. And so if you're proposing that you're delivering a project and you're going into a community, we need to understand that community, there's a desire from that community for you to do the work there. What's the evidence that you've got to show us that they want that? And that it's going to continue to benefit them. What does it look like when you exit? Is there a plan for that? Is it something that the community is going to retain ownership of? What does that look like? So that's short answer is it's fine. We just need to understand some of that context and what that looks like. The organisation, I'm part of an organisation, can we apply? Again, I'm bringing this one up because we do still see it quite a bit. And so I think it's worth just continuously reiterating that if you're an organisation, this probably isn't the funding for you, but there are situations where if you're developing it in context of something that it could be okay. We also want to mention that it doesn't, if you've started taking those first steps, you may have started to form a committee, or you've, you're a sole trader with an ABN. Those steps are okay as long as it's under that threshold of under 3 years of active development. We also have had situations where a project has been funded, and then as a result of the project being delivered, they have, started an organisation or started to develop a charity, and that's totally fine. And we're happy for that to be the result of the project. And so I just wanted to mention that as well. We had some confusion from people who thought that, if they became an entity during the process of delivering their project, that would then make them ineligible. And it's really not that. It's just around that, this is funding for organisations or new ideas that wouldn't otherwise be eligible for philanthropic funding. How much can I apply for? So some people, apply for under $50,000. The grants are $50,000 flat, so apply for the full $50,000. There's no amount under that. There's up to 10 grants that will be distributed this grant round. The funding will become available between November and January. So there is a bit of we've given you a couple of months there, because this really is dependent on the successful grantees getting all their due diligence processes done. So if we were to get absolutely everything from you straight away and you progress through it very quickly, it could be November, but you're really kind of looking at January for program delivery. But that is when the funds become available, and that just gets transferred as one lump payment. Payment to an individual. So funds are paid direct to a personal or business bank account, depending on the individual. There is an opportunity if you feel like, you would prefer if the funds get paid to and held by an organisation, that we can explore those opportunities. So there has been situations where, say, there's a small group of people delivering something together in community, and they didn't want the responsibility of having it sitting in an individual's bank account. And so they had a community group holding the money for them to draw down on and deliver the project as needed. So there is potentially an opportunity there if you needed to have a conversation with us about that if you're successful. We also really encourage you, because this is a grant payment to an individual, if you're going to be taking a wage or anything like that as the result of this project, we encourage you to seek taxation advice regarding your individual circumstances and what that will look like for you. We can't give tax advice, obviously, but we encourage you to explore what this looks like for you as an individual. If you were successful with the grant and you wanted to allocate some of your funding to getting taxation advice as well, that would also be an eligible expense if you wanted to make that part of your project as well. Future grant rounds. This is an annual grant program. We've been lucky enough to support it for quite some years. We've got a great group of funded projects. There'll also be a Queensland grant round in January, and then the next New South Wales grant round will open again next July. So the exact same kind of time frame for projects in the following year. That is about all that we have for you today. If you have any questions, feel free to jump in now and ask them. But there's some more information there. If, as you've been listening to this, you want to know more, there's a great podcast on the VFFF website, which tells some of the stories of the previous projects. The EOIs close on the 19th of August, and one of the questions there was around if you get the EOI response after the 19th of August and you've only then got a few days until full applications are due. EOIs are assessed on a rolling basis. So if you submit your EOI tomorrow, that will be assessed. We'll make sure you're eligible, and then if you are, you'll get the full application. So as long as you get your EOI in a timely manner, then you'll be able to do the full applications. Additional funding, if you, as you've listened to this, you thought maybe this is not for me, but I'm still delivering a project for young people, I just wanted to put on your radar. Haywire Youth Grants are another FRRR grant program for organisations. They're open every year. The next grant round will be open in March. And then we also have projects funding for the Next Gen Blueprint grants, which supports young people as well. So potentially have a look there if that's something that interests you. Some more questions here. Steph, once an application is submitted, can it be corrected or amended before the closing date?
Yes, it can. So there's an opportunity once, if an EOI is eligible and you're invited to submit a full application by VFFF, there is a section to say, like a kind of little paragraph section where you can write, oh, actually, I meant instead of saying wee war, I actually wanted to do this program in Coonabarabran, and you can kind of put amendments, you know, on the budget, on any kind of project summaries and things like that, but you aren't able to actually like edit those responses as they were first submitted, but there is a space for you to say, here are the changes that I would make that, you know, weren't on my EOI. So yes, that's the long and the short answer.
And just for sort of the recording here, there was also a question around does registering a sole trader ABN affect eligibility, and can a sole trader ABN be used to pay the young people for project? And that's fine. Yes, sole traders are fine to apply, and we can fund the you know, business account. That's okay. Great. Any other questions? Yeah, I think just as we're kind of closing, you know, if you have questions or there's still something that feels a little bit curly for you, feel free to reach out to Steph. She's great at kind of demystifying all the nuances of it. And yeah, there's a youthfutures@frrr.org.au email address. You can shoot it through to that, or else you can, yeah, make a phone call and we can have a chat. I'm hopeful that you all felt very inspired and are all thinking, yes, my project is wonderfully in alignment with this and I'm going to apply. We're really lucky to look after this grant program. It's pretty fantastic. We see some great projects across the state and great projects for young people. So hopefully we'll be able to support this next cohort with some more impactful projects. Wonderful. All right, if there's nothing else, we might close the meeting and yeah, all have a wonderful day. Reach out if there's anything we can help you with.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming.